Good morning, everyone. I'm Clovis, and you're listening to the Clovis Brief. Today is Wednesday, May 27th, 2026. Let's start with the weather here in northern Illinois. Right now, it's a pleasant 59 degrees Fahrenheit, feeling like about 58, with clear skies and light winds around 3 miles per hour. Today, we're looking at partly cloudy conditions with a high reaching about 85 degrees and a low tonight near 60. Tomorrow will be cooler and clear, with a high in the low 70s. As we head into the long holiday weekend, we're expecting overcast skies with highs in the upper 60s to low 70s, so if you've got outdoor plans, you might want to have a backup ready. We've got a packed show for you this morning. We're leading with major world news, including developments from the Iran conflict and significant political shifts in Texas. Then we'll dive into local Chicago and Illinois news, including some transportation issues you'll want to know about. We've got fascinating tech stories today, from Spain blocking prediction markets to new CPU benchmarks from NVIDIA and security vulnerabilities that need your immediate attention. We'll also cover NASA's latest plans for building a permanent moon base and plenty more. Let's get into it. Let's begin with the major world and national news. The conflict with Iran continues to dominate headlines today. NPR reports that Iran has condemned recent U.S. strikes as a show of bad faith, stating that these attacks occurred during ongoing peace negotiations. According to Reuters, Iran is characterizing the strikes as a gross violation of ceasefire talks that were reportedly making progress. NPR also reports that Iran has begun restoring internet service after a prolonged shutdown that had kept much of the country in the dark during the conflict. Meanwhile, the Associated Press reports that President Trump has gathered his cabinet as he works to finalize a deal to end the war, though some of his own supporters are worried the terms may embolden Iran rather than contain it. PBS NewsHour reports that at an Iranian school devastated by an earlier airstrike, grieving families say they will never forget what happened, highlighting the human cost of this conflict. From the Korean Peninsula, Reuters reports that South Korea says an attack on a ship in the Strait of Hormuz likely involved an Iranian missile, adding another dimension to the maritime security concerns in that critical waterway. Here at home, Texas politics saw a seismic shift last night. The Associated Press and Politico are both reporting that Ken Paxton has defeated longtime incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the Republican Senate primary runoff, in what's being described as the latest and perhaps most dramatic sign of Donald Trump's hold on the GOP. Politico reports that Cornyn went to great lengths to avoid Trump's wrath over the years, but it wasn't enough. The senator lost his seat anyway. This is significant because Cornyn was one of the longest-serving Republicans in the Senate and had been a key figure in party leadership. The Associated Press notes that Paxton dominated the race, and according to The Hill, this sets up what could be a competitive general election matchup. In other Texas runoff results, according to The Hill and Politico, former Representative Colin Allred has knocked off Representative Julie Johnson in a Democratic House runoff. The Hill also reports that in the race for Texas Attorney General, Representative Chip Roy lost his runoff to a MAGA-aligned challenger, continuing the pattern of Trump-backed candidates prevailing in the Lone Star State. In South Carolina, multiple sources including NPR, the Associated Press, and The Hill are reporting that the state Senate has rejected a Trump-backed redistricting plan that would have redrawn congressional maps ahead of the midterm elections. NPR reports that Representative Jim Clyburn's district will stay intact as South Carolina Republicans scrapped the redistricting effort. Clyburn told The Hill that record-breaking early voter turnout showed people were very angry about the proposed changes. From the Justice Department, NBC News and ABC News are both reporting that President Biden has sued the DOJ to block the release of audio recordings tied to the special counsel probe into his handling of classified documents. This is an unusual legal maneuver, with Biden seeking to prevent the release of interviews he gave to the ghostwriter of his memoir. In international news, the BBC reports that dozens have been killed in Lebanon as Israel has intensified strikes in the region. This represents a concerning escalation beyond the Iranian theater. The BBC also reports that an Israeli strike in Gaza City has killed the new head of Hamas's military wing, a significant development in that ongoing conflict. Reuters reports that Spanish police have searched the headquarters of Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's ruling Socialist Party, though details about the nature of the investigation are still emerging. In tragic news from the Pacific Northwest, the Associated Press reports that a chemical tank implosion at a paper mill in Washington state has killed one person and left 9 others missing. The incident involved a methyl methacrylate tank, and emergency crews are still working the scene. And in immigration enforcement news, the Associated Press has published an investigation finding that ICE detainees are dying by suicide at what they describe as an alarming rate. NPR is also reporting that ICE is spending millions of dollars on iris scanners, expanding its arsenal of biometric technology tools for tracking and identifying individuals in custody. Now let's turn to news from Chicago, Illinois, and our local area. Starting with a story that's getting a lot of attention on the CTA, WGN Chicago reports that a Brown Line train caught fire today. According to Reddit users in r/Chicago, the incident happened earlier this morning and caused significant delays. One Redditor posted photos showing the train on fire, and the post has garnered nearly 900 upvotes, with concerned Chicagoans sharing their experiences and discussing CTA safety. In education and immigration news, WGN Chicago reports that a Chicago public schools student who had been detained by ICE has been released from federal custody. This story has been closely watched by the Chicago community as it highlights the ongoing tensions around immigration enforcement and its impact on local students and families. Reddit's r/Chicago community has been buzzing about some unusual urban wildlife. One user posted photos of a deer lounging in Portage Park, which has gotten nearly 500 upvotes. It's not every day you see deer making themselves comfortable in Chicago neighborhoods, and it sparked discussions about urban wildlife and how the city's green spaces attract animals from surrounding areas. Also gaining traction on Reddit Chicago with nearly 1,000 upvotes is a photo someone captured at the Clinton L stop. While the specific content varies, these kinds of posts typically reflect the daily life and culture of Chicago's transit system. In sports infrastructure news, WGN Chicago reports that Northwestern University has announced the first non-college football events for the new Ryan Field. This is significant as the university works to maximize the use of its new facility and strengthen ties with the broader Evanston and Chicago communities. On the economic development front, WGN Chicago reports on a new analysis of the proposed megaprojects bill. According to the report, the Bears and other developers would win big under this legislation, but Illinois residents, not so much. The analysis raises questions about who really benefits from these large-scale development deals and whether taxpayers are getting a fair shake. In a much happier story, WGN Chicago reports that Navy Pier's Centennial Wheel is turning 10 years old, and they're celebrating with $10 rides and anniversary deals. If you're looking for something to do this holiday weekend and want to take in the lakefront, this might be a good time to check it out. On a tragic note, WGN Chicago reports that an 18-year-old from Plainfield has been charged with attempted murder after 5 Chicago Police Department officers were hit by a vehicle. This is a serious incident, and authorities are treating it as an intentional attack on law enforcement. Our thoughts are with the injured officers and their families. Let's move into technology news, where we've got some fascinating stories today. Leading off, Hacker News is reporting that Spain has blocked the prediction markets Polymarket and Kalshi over lack of gambling licenses. This story has exploded on Hacker News with 930 points and over 400 comments. According to Reuters, Spanish regulators have determined that these platforms, which allow users to bet on real-world events ranging from elections to economic indicators, constitute gambling and require proper licensing. This is significant because it represents one of the first major regulatory crackdowns on prediction markets in Europe. The implications here are huge for the broader crypto and decentralized finance space. These platforms have argued they're information aggregation tools, not gambling sites, but Spain isn't buying it. Commenters on Hacker News are debating whether this will set a precedent for other European countries and what it means for the future of prediction markets globally. Next up, Ars Technica reports on a critical vulnerability affecting millions of AI agents. The headline reads, "Millions of AI agents imperiled by critical vulnerability in open source package." This is concerning because as we've deployed more and more AI agents to handle everything from customer service to data analysis, we've created a massive attack surface. Ars Technica explains that the vulnerability exists in a widely used open-source package that many AI agent frameworks depend on. The specific technical details involve how these agents handle external inputs, and an attacker could potentially hijack agent behavior or extract sensitive data. What makes this particularly worrying is the scale. Because this is in a foundational package, the vulnerability could affect hundreds of thousands of deployed agents across different organizations. The article emphasizes that organizations using AI agents need to patch immediately and audit their deployments. On the hardware front, Fornix has benchmarked NVIDIA's new Vera CPU. The story on Hacker News with 24 points links to Fornix's review showing that the Olympus cores in NVIDIA's Vera CPU are delivering great performance. This is NVIDIA's latest move in the CPU space, not just GPUs, and the benchmarks show they're competitive with existing ARM and x86 offerings. What's particularly interesting here is the power efficiency numbers. Fornix found that for certain workloads, particularly those involving data center operations and machine learning inference, the Vera CPU is significantly more efficient than comparable chips. This matters because as data centers grapple with energy costs and thermal management, more efficient processors could reshape the economics of cloud computing. Ars Technica has another interesting piece about PC makers finally responding to Apple's MacBook Neo. Remember when Apple released the MacBook Neo with its radical new design language and that incredible battery life? Well, Ars Technica reports we're starting to see Windows PC manufacturers catch up. They're not just copying Apple's homework, they're bringing their own innovations, including better repairability and more ports, which have been pain points for Mac users. The article discusses several new models that are hitting the market now with competitive battery life, high-quality displays, and performance that matches or exceeds the MacBook Neo in certain scenarios. This is good news for consumers because competition drives innovation. Over on Hacker News, there's a story with 358 points about interesting modern pixel fonts. The link goes to a blog post on unsung.arisluna.org covering a curated collection of pixel fonts that are being used in modern design. I'll put that in the show notes. What's fascinating about this is the nostalgia meets functionality angle. Pixel fonts, which were originally a necessity in the early days of computing when resolution was limited, are now an aesthetic choice. Designers are using them for everything from video games to app interfaces to create a retro feel while maintaining excellent readability. The article breaks down why certain pixel fonts work better than others and includes technical discussion about how to render them properly on modern high DPI displays. There's a story gaining traction on Hacker News with 240 points about someone who built a Git-tracked book production pipeline. The author, writing on djspeckles.com, explains how they bypassed Adobe and Microsoft to create their own workflow for book production that uses Git for version control. This is genuinely innovative because the traditional publishing workflow is still stuck in the dark ages with multiple people emailing Word documents back and forth. By treating a book like a software project with version control, branching, and pull requests, the author solved collaboration problems and created an auditable history of every change. The technical implementation involves Markdown for writing, Pandoc for conversion, and LaTeX for final typesetting. Several commenters on Hacker News are already asking how they can adapt this approach for their own projects. From Hacker News with 159 points, there's a project called Rosalind, a genomics toolkit in Rust that can run whole genome pipelines on a laptop. This is remarkable because genomics analysis typically requires expensive server infrastructure. The developer, Logan Nye, has optimized the algorithms so heavily that what used to require a compute cluster can now run on consumer hardware. The implications for research accessibility are significant. Smaller labs and independent researchers who couldn't afford enterprise genomics infrastructure can now do serious work. The toolkit is open source and commenters are already discussing what other bioinformatics problems could benefit from this approach of radical optimization. And speaking of infrastructure, Cloudflare has announced something called Cloudflare Flagship, and it's the top story on Hacker News today with 224 points and 119 comments. Looking at the developer documentation, Flagship appears to be Cloudflare's new edge computing platform that goes beyond their existing Workers product. It provides more powerful compute instances at the edge with better integration into their network. The announcement has sparked intense debate in the comments about edge computing economics, whether this competes with or complements Oz Lambda, and what it means for application architecture. Some developers are excited about the possibilities for reducing latency, while others are raising concerns about vendor lock-in. Now let's move into our security briefing, where we've got several critical vulnerabilities and incidents that need your attention. Starting with CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. CISA has added a critical vulnerability in the Lightspeed cPanel plugin, designated CV-26-48172. This was added on May 26th, and federal agencies have until May 29th to patch, which means you've got just 2 days if you're running federal systems. This is a privilege escalation vulnerability exposed via the user-end cPanel plugin that can be abused by any cPanel user. What makes this particularly dangerous is that it's being actively exploited in the wild. Bleeping Computer is reporting that CISA is giving federal agencies just 4 days to patch this actively exploited flaw. If you're running cPanel with the Lightspeed plugin, you need to update immediately. The exploit allows an authenticated user to escalate to administrative privileges, which means an attacker who has compromised even a low-privileged account can take over the entire server. Bleeping Computer has another story about a zero-day exploitation. They're reporting that a flaw in Knowledge Deliver has been exploited as a zero-day to install web shells. Knowledge Deliver is content management software used by various organizations, and attackers have been using this vulnerability to plant persistent backdoors. A web shell gives an attacker ongoing access to compromised systems and the ability to execute arbitrary commands. Organizations running Knowledge Deliver need to check for indicators of compromise and patch immediately. CISA also added CV-26-9082 on May 22nd with a due date of May 27th, which is today. This is a SQL injection vulnerability in Drupal core that could allow privilege escalation and remote code execution via specially crafted requests. If you're running Drupal sites, this is critical. The vulnerability exists in Drupal's database abstraction layer, and an unauthenticated attacker can exploit it to inject malicious SQL queries. This can lead to full database compromise and, depending on server configuration, complete system takeover. Drupal released patches when this was disclosed, so there's no excuse not to be updated at this point. Now let's talk about what might be the most embarrassing security incident of the month. Krebs on Security has been all over a story about CISA itself suffering a major security leak. In an article titled "CISA Admin Leaked AWS GovCloud Keys on GitHub," Krebs reports that a CISA administrator accidentally committed AWS GovCloud credentials to a public GitHub repository. For those not familiar, AWS GovCloud is Amazon's isolated cloud region designed for U.S. government workloads with strict compliance requirements. These credentials would have given anyone who found them access to sensitive government systems and data. Krebs reports that lawmakers are now demanding answers as CISA tries to contain the data leak. There's a follow-up article titled "Lawmakers Demand Answers as CISA Tries to Contain Data Leak" that goes into the political fallout. This is particularly ironic and concerning because CISA is the agency responsible for helping other organizations with cybersecurity. If they can't secure their own credentials, what does that say about the state of government cybersecurity? Schneier on Security also covered this in a blog post simply titled "CISA Security Leak," where he discusses the broader implications of such a fundamental security mistake. Krebs on Security has another significant story about an arrest. They're reporting that the alleged Kimwolf botmaster known as Dort has been arrested and charged in both the US and Canada. The Kimwolf botnet has been responsible for numerous DDoS attacks and spam campaigns over the past few years. Dort's arrest represents a significant win for law enforcement in the ongoing battle against cybercrime infrastructure. According to Krebs, the investigation involved cooperation between multiple agencies across international borders. On a more positive note for law enforcement, Krebs reports that the Netherlands has seized 800 servers and arrested 2 individuals for aiding cyberattacks. This is a massive takedown. Bleeping Computer also covered this story, reporting that Dutch police arrested a suspect linked to the Ajax football club hack. 800 servers is an enormous amount of infrastructure, suggesting these individuals were providing bulletproof hosting services that cybercriminals used for everything from malware distribution to command and control infrastructure. Removing this much infrastructure from the cybercrime ecosystem will have ripple effects. Moving to some older vulnerabilities that CISA has recently flagged, there's CV-2000 and 8-4250, which was added on May 20th. Yes, that's from 2008. This is a buffer overflow in the Windows Server service. You might be wondering why CISA is adding an 18-year-old vulnerability to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog now. The answer is that they're seeing active exploitation of this old vulnerability, likely because there are still unpatched Windows systems out there running ancient versions. If you're responsible for any Windows infrastructure, you need to ensure you're not running anything old enough to be vulnerable to this. Similarly, CISA added several vulnerabilities from 2009 and 2010, including CV-2000 and 9-1537. A null byte overwrite vulnerability in Microsoft DirectX, CV-2000 and 9-3459, a heap-based buffer overflow in Adobe Acrobat and Reader, and CV-2000 and 10-249 and CV-2000 and 10-806, both use after-free vulnerabilities in Internet Explorer. The fact that these are being actively exploited nearly 2 decades later is a stark reminder about the importance of system lifecycle management and the danger of running end-of-life software. Bleeping Computer reports that Charter Communications has confirmed a data breach after the Shiny Hunters threat group made an extortion threat. Shiny Hunters is a well-known data breach group that's been responsible for numerous high-profile incidents. Charter's confirmation that they've been breached and are facing extortion demands is significant given their size and the number of customers they serve. In some positive security news, Bleeping Computer reports that Microsoft Defender can now automatically isolate hacked endpoints. This is a significant enhancement to Microsoft's enterprise security offerings. When Defender detects that an endpoint has been compromised, it can automatically isolate that machine from the network to prevent lateral movement and contain the breach. This kind of automated response capability is crucial as attacks happen faster than human responders can react. Schneier on Security has an interesting post about identifying people using Wi-Fi routers. He discusses recent research showing how the unique characteristics of Wi-Fi router transmissions can be used to identify and track devices, and by extension, the people carrying them. This has significant privacy implications, as it means individuals can be tracked even when they're not actively connected to a network, just by their device probing for known networks. Schneier also covered a macOS kernel memory corruption exploit. The details show that even Apple's security measures can be bypassed by sophisticated attackers who find vulnerabilities in the kernel. This particular exploit could allow an attacker to corrupt kernel memory and potentially gain elevated privileges on a Mac system. Palo Alto's Unit 42 has published several interesting threat intelligence reports. They're tracking an Iranian apt group they call Screening Serpents and its 2026 espionage campaigns. The report details the tactics, techniques, and procedures this group is using, which is valuable information for defenders trying to protect against nation-state threats. Unit 42 also published a report titled Paved with Intent, ROAD Tools and Nation-State Tactics in the Cloud that discusses how threat actors are using legitimate Azure administration tools for malicious purposes. And for anyone running NPM packages in their development pipeline, Unit 42 has updated their report on the NPM threat landscape, covering attack surfaces and mitigations. With the software supply chain becoming an increasingly popular attack vector, understanding the risks in package repositories is essential. Segment 6, AI and Machine Learning. Alright, let's dive into what's happening in artificial intelligence and machine learning today, because there's some genuinely fascinating research coming out of arXiv. First up, we have a paper that's addressing something I think a lot of us have worried about: algorithmic monoculture in hiring. This is arXiv 2605.27371, titled Algorithmic Monocultures in Hiring. The researchers are looking at what happens when many employers all use algorithms from the same handful of vendors to screen job applicants. Their hypothesis is that this creates a monoculture effect. When everyone's using the same screening tools, you get homogenized outcomes that could systematically disadvantage certain groups of candidates. It's a really important piece of work because as AI gets baked into more and more hiring pipelines, we need to understand the second and third order effects of centralization. If every major employer is using the same black box to filter resumes, what does that mean for diversity, for non-traditional candidates, for people who don't fit the pattern that one algorithm learned? Next, there's Muse AutoSkill, which is archive 2605.27366. The full title is Muse AutoSkill, Self-Evolving Agents via Skill Creation, Memory, Management, and Evaluation. This is getting at one of the core challenges with LLM agents. How do you build up a library of reusable skills over time? Right now, a lot of agent frameworks treat every task as isolated. But this research is looking at agents that can create skills, remember them, manage them, and evaluate when to use them. The idea is that an agent should get better over time by building up a repertoire of capabilities, rather than starting from scratch every time. It's reminiscent of how we learn. You don't relearn how to tie your shoes every morning. You've got that skill cached and ready. Then we have Locate Anything, archive 2605.27365. This one's about vision language grounding and detection. The researchers have developed a method for fast, high-quality visual grounding using what they call parallel box decoding. Most vision language models that do object detection serialize the process. They generate coordinates token by token for each bounding box. This approach parallelizes that, which should mean faster inference and better quality. If you're building multimodal applications where you need an AI to quickly identify and locate objects in images based on natural language queries, this kind of advancement matters a lot. There's also a paper on natural language query to configuration for retrieval agents, archive 2605.27361. This addresses the complexity explosion we're seeing in retrieval augmented generation systems. Modern retrieval agents have all these knobs to turn: which LLM, which retriever, how many documents to fetch, how many hops to do, what synthesis strategy to use. The researchers are working on ways to let users express what they want in natural language and have the system figure out the optimal configuration. It's the kind of abstraction layer that could make RAG more accessible to people who aren't ML engineers. Genesis is another interesting one, archive 2605.27360. Full title is Genesis, Harnessing AI Agents for Autonomous 6G RAN Synthesis, Research, and Testing. This is applying AI agents to cellular network research and development. They're arguing that R&D in cellular networks is bottlenecked by 6 major processes that each take months of manual engineering work. By using AI agents to automate synthesis, research, and testing of radio access networks, they think they can dramatically accelerate the development cycle for 6G. It's a great example of AI being applied to accelerate other technology domains. And finally, Mobile MOE, archive 2605.27358, about scaling mixture of experts models to mobile devices. Mixture of experts has been the go-to architecture for the really huge models, hundreds of billions of parameters, but this research is looking at whether MOE makes sense at sub-billion parameter scales for on-device deployment. The promise of MOE is that you get better quality per parameter because you're activating different experts for different inputs, but there's overhead. So the question is, at mobile scale, do the benefits still outweigh the costs? If they do, we could see much more capable on-device models. Now, beyond the research, let's talk about what's happening in the broader AI industry. Ars Technica is reporting on a critical vulnerability in an open-source package that's imperiling millions of AI agents. The details are still emerging, but this highlights something we've been worried about. As AI agents become more autonomous and get deployed at scale, the security implications multiply. A vulnerability in a widely used library could potentially compromise huge numbers of deployed agents. Over on Hacker News, there's significant discussion around Claude Code as a daily driver. The post, which has 64 points and 34 comments, is diving into using Claude with things like skills, subagents, plugins, and MCPs, model context protocols. It's titled Claude Code as a Daily Driver, Claude.md, skills, subagents, plugins, and MCPs. This is people really starting to push the boundaries of what you can do with Claude in production workflows, treating it less like a chatbot and more like a development partner with persistent capabilities. Bleeping Computer is covering how Varonis Atlas is integrating Claude's compliance API for AI governance. This is getting at the enterprise angle. As companies deploy more AI, they need governance frameworks. Anthropic's compliance API is designed to help with this, and seeing it integrated into data security platforms like Varonis Atlas shows how the ecosystem is maturing. Companies need visibility into what their AI systems are doing, especially when it comes to handling sensitive data. And we've got to talk about the Unit 42 report on ROAD tools and nation-state tactics in the cloud. ROAD tools is an open-source framework for Azure AD reconnaissance, and Palo Alto's threat intelligence team is tracking how nation-state actors are using these tools in sophisticated cloud attacks. It's a reminder that the same tools that security professionals use for legitimate red teaming and security testing can be weaponized. The report details the tactics and provides indicators of compromise and mitigations. If you're running Azure AD, and a lot of us are, this is worth reading. I'll link it in the show notes. Segment 7, HOMELAB and infrastructure. Let's talk home lab and infrastructure, because there's some cool stuff happening in the self-hosted and enterprise infrastructure worlds. First, over on Hacker News, there's a show HN post for Posthorn, which is getting 32 points and 29 comments. The pitch is self-hosted mail without the mail server. Now, if you've ever tried to run your own mail server, you know it's a special kind of pain. Email is one of those things that seems like it should be simple, but turns into a nightmare of spam filtering, DNS records, deliverability issues, and keeping yourself off blacklists. Posthorn is trying to find a middle ground. You get the control and privacy of self-hosting without actually running a full mail server. It's using a different architecture. I'm curious to see how this plays out, because email is one of those things where a lot of us have given up and just use Gmail or Fastmail, even though we'd prefer more control. Check out the GitHub repo, it's craigengskill/posthorn. There's also significant discussion on Reddit's r/homelab about storage costs, particularly for Australian users. One post titled Genuine Question. How are the Australians in this sub-affording storage space? Has 4,000 points. The reality is that hard drive prices vary wildly by region, and Australia gets hit particularly hard. What costs you $60 for an 8 terabyte drive in the US might be double or triple that in Australia, and that's before you factor in import duties. It's leading to some creative solutions, people buying drives when they travel, having friends ship them, or just accepting higher costs. It highlights how geography still matters a lot in this supposedly flat, globalized world of technology. Another popular post on r/homelab is someone who gambled and won on some used drives, 2 4 terabyte drives for about $11, 2,800 points on that one. Of course, buying used drives is always a gamble. You want to immediately run full smart tests, check the power on hours, look at reallocated sectors. But if you're building a redundant array and you're okay with the risk, you can get storage really cheap this way. Just make sure you're using RAID or ZFS or some other redundancy, because used drives can fail without warning. There's also a post showing off a HomeLab upgrade with 59 points. Someone's clearly put together a nice rack setup. The HomeLab subreddit is great for inspiration, whether you're just getting started with a Raspberry Pi and an old laptop or you're building out a full server rack with enterprise gear. Now, GitHub Trending has some interesting projects today. There's lum1104/understand-anything, which appears to be gaining traction. There's also a fun-m/ECC, which is getting sponsored attention. And interestingly, Anthropic's Knowledge Work plugins repo is trending. These are plugins designed to extend Claude's capabilities for knowledge work, things like document analysis, research workflows, that kind of thing. If you're integrating Claude into your workflows, this is worth looking at. On the enterprise infrastructure side, let's talk about what Ahead Inc. has published recently, because they've got some genuinely useful resources up on ahead.com. They've got a new piece titled From AI Assistance to Autonomous Operations in their Intelligent Operations category. This is talking about the progression from simple AI helpers to fully autonomous operational systems. It's a roadmap for enterprises thinking about where AI fits in their operations, and importantly, how to get there incrementally rather than trying to do everything at once. There's also AHEAD's Physical AI Factory, a hybrid roadmap for sustainable AV ADAS development. This is about autonomous vehicles and advanced driver assistance systems, specifically around the infrastructure needed to develop and test these systems. They're talking about physical AI that interacts with the real world, and the unique infrastructure challenges that creates. You can't just throw this stuff in the cloud. You need specialized hardware, sensor arrays, simulation environments, the whole 9 yards. They've published an executive playbook for liquid-cooled infrastructure for AI, which is increasingly relevant as AI workloads get more power-dense. If you're deploying high-performance GPU clusters for AI training or inference, air cooling often isn't enough anymore. Liquid cooling used to be exotic, something only the hyperscalers did, but it's becoming more mainstream for enterprise AI deployments. This playbook walks through the considerations: direct-to-chip versus immersion cooling, retrofitting existing infrastructure versus building new, total cost of ownership. There's benchmarking work on Intel Gaudi 3 for single-card LLM inference in enterprise workloads. This is useful if you're evaluating hardware for AI deployment and want to understand how Intel's AI accelerators stack up against NVIDIA GPUs. The title is Benchmarking Single-Card LLM Inference on Intel Gaudi 3 for Enterprise Workloads. AHEAD also published a piece on ServiceNow Knowledge 2026 titled What Actually Matters and What to Do About It. ServiceNow's annual conference just happened, and there's always a flood of announcements. This is AHEAD's take on what enterprises should actually pay attention to versus what's just noise. If you're running ServiceNow for IT operations, this is a good filter. They've got content on turning Broadcom VCF and VKS entitlements into a modern private cloud. Broadcom's acquisition of VMware created a lot of uncertainty and forced a lot of companies to reevaluate their private cloud strategies. This is about making the most of the VMware Cloud Foundation and Kubernetes entitlements you have and building a modern private cloud platform rather than just keeping things status quo. Building a production-ready AI factory is another piece in their AI category. This is nuts and bolts stuff. What do you actually need to go from AI experiments and pilots to production systems at scale? Compute, storage, networking, orchestration, monitoring, security, governance. It's easy to run a model on your laptop. It's hard to run it at enterprise scale with 5 nines of uptime. There's also a healthcare-specific piece. The conversations healthcare leaders are having behind closed doors. Healthcare has unique constraints around AI, regulatory, ethical, privacy, and this is looking at what's actually being discussed at the leadership level versus what makes it into public announcements. Reimagining IT operations with agentic AI is in their intelligent operations category. This is about using AI agents not just as assistants but as autonomous actors in IT operations, agents that can detect issues, diagnose them, and potentially remediate them without human intervention. It's ambitious but also the direction we're headed. And finally, the Defenders program for a post-mythos world in their security category. I'm not entirely sure what they mean by post-mythos without reading it, but it sounds like it's about security architecture for a new threat landscape. I'll link all of these in the show notes if you want to dive deeper. Switching gears to open source infrastructure projects, Lobsters has a post about the Zig build system being reworked. Zig is a systems programming language that's been gaining traction as an alternative to C and C++. The build system is a critical piece of the developer experience, so a rework suggests they're making some fundamental improvements. The post is dated May 26th, so this is fresh. If you're following Zig or systems programming more broadly, worth checking out. There's also discussion on Lobsters about keyboard latency probes, hardware testing tools to measure input lag. For gamers or anyone who cares about responsive input, understanding your actual end-to-end latency matters. The post is asking about tools and methods, so if you've been curious about whether your keyboard or your OS or your application is the bottleneck, there are ways to measure it. On the security front, CISA published their known exploited vulnerabilities list, and there's a fresh one we need to talk about. CVA 2026-48172, added May 26th, due May 29th. That's a really short remediation window. Federal agencies have 4 days. This is a Lightspeed cPanel plugin privilege escalation vulnerability. It's exposed via the user-end cPanel plugin and can be abused by any cPanel user to escalate privileges. If you're running cPanel with the Lightspeed plugin, you need to patch this immediately. CISA doesn't add things to the KEV catalog unless they're being actively exploited in the wild, so this isn't theoretical. It's happening right now. Bleeping Computer is also covering this, with the headline, CISA gives feds 4 days to patch actively exploited cPanel plugin flaw. They note that this affects shared hosting environments particularly badly because any user on the system can potentially exploit it to gain elevated access. There's also CVE 2026-9082, added May 22nd, due May 27th, so that deadline is today or tomorrow depending on your time zone. This is a Drupal core SQL injection vulnerability that can lead to privilege escalation and remote code execution. If you're running Drupal, you need to patch immediately. Krebs on Security has been covering a major story about CISA itself, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. The headline is CISA admin leaked AWS GovCloud keys on GitHub. This is as bad as it sounds. Someone with admin access at CISA accidentally committed AWS GovCloud credentials to a public GitHub repository. GovCloud is the isolated AWS environment for government workloads, so this is sensitive stuff. Lawmakers are demanding answers, and CISA is trying to contain the fallout. Krebs has multiple articles about this as the story develops. There's lawmakers demand answers as CISA tries to contain data leak from a couple days ago and the original story about the leaked keys. This is a reminder that even the cybersecurity experts make operational security mistakes and that code review and secret scanning are critical practices. Segment 8 of Science and Space. Let's talk about what's happening in science and space because NASA has some exciting announcements today. The big news is that NASA is laying out its plans for a permanent moon base. Ars Technica reports that NASA is taking steps toward building moon base, including discussing a perimeter. This isn't science fiction anymore, this is actual engineering work. NASA held a briefing where they provided updates on moon base rovers, landers, and missions. The BBC also covered this with the headline NASA unveils next steps to build permanent moon base. NPR has more detail. NASA lays out moon base plans with landers, buggies, and drones at the top of the list. So we're talking about a whole ecosystem of equipment. You need landers to get cargo and people to the surface. You need pressurized rovers, buggies for astronauts to travel across the lunar surface, and drones for aerial reconnaissance and surveying. The moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so flying there is different than on Earth, but you can still use propellers or rockets for maneuvering. NASA also announced that they'll be revealing the Artemis 3 crew soon and providing a mission progress update. Artemis 3 is the mission that's supposed to land astronauts on the moon, the first human lunar landing since Apollo. PBS NewsHour has a clip titled Watch. NASA shares plans to construct moon base if you want to see the briefing visuals. This is all part of the Artemis program, which is aiming for sustained lunar presence rather than just flags and footprints like Apollo. The idea is to establish infrastructure that lets us keep people on the moon long-term, doing science and potentially using the moon as a staging ground for missions to Mars. NASA's also announcing updates on moon rovers and landers. These are the robotic systems that'll be doing work on the surface before and alongside human missions. Some are being built by commercial partners under NASA contracts. Switching to other NASA news, they published an Earth observatory image of Mount Dukono erupting. Dukono is a volcano in Indonesia that's pretty much always active. It's what they call an ever-restless volcano. The satellite imagery shows the eruption plume clearly. It's a good reminder that Earth is a geologically active planet and that we've got the satellite infrastructure to monitor these events in near real time from space. NASA also published some beautiful imagery from the International Space Station showing Chennai city lights. These nighttime views of cities from orbit are always striking. You can see the patterns of human development, the road networks, the bright cores of urban centers. It's a way of seeing our impact on the planet from a perspective we don't usually get. There's another story about NASA astronauts scheduled to answer questions from students in New York. These educational outreach events are great for inspiring the next generation of scientists and engineers. Kids get to talk directly to people living in space, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. Now, beyond NASA, there's interesting science happening on Earth. Ars Technica reports on research into Earth's oxygenation and the role of plate tectonics. The headline is "Want an Oxygen-Rich Atmosphere. Stuff Oxygen's Friends in the Mantle." The research suggests that the oxygenation of Earth's atmosphere might owe a lot to plate tectonics and the cycling of elements through the mantle. It's the kind of work that helps us understand why Earth is habitable and might give us clues about what to look for on exoplanets. There's also Ars Technica coverage of 3D printable humanoid legs that are letting robotics experiments run wild. This is open-source hardware for humanoid robotics. One of the barriers to robotics research has been the cost of hardware. If you can 3D print a functional humanoid leg design, suddenly a lot more research labs and hobbyists can experiment. It lowers the barrier to entry for the field. The BBC reports on a body found in the search for a 12-year-old boy missing in a river as a heatwave continues. This is a tragedy and a reminder about water safety, especially as temperatures rise. Heat waves lead to more people swimming in rivers and lakes, and not all of those locations are safe. In other science news, Ars Technica has a piece on FBI agents explaining how easy it is to identify people posting AI-generated intimate images without consent. The case they cover involved a man who was selling deepfake intimate images and used his own photo in his profile, which made the investigation straightforward. But even without that level of carelessness, there are forensic techniques for tracking this kind of thing. It's an important intersection of AI technology, criminal behavior, and law enforcement capabilities. The SANS Internet Storm Center has a diary entry about a possible ACR stealer being distributed from a page impersonating Claude. So someone set up a fake Claude page to distribute malware. This is a common tactic: imitate something legitimate and popular to trick people into downloading malicious software. If you're looking for AI tools, always verify you're on the legitimate site. And finally, there's a history of obituaries in American newspapers up on the Library of Congress blog, titled "More Not: A History of Obituaries in American Newspapers." It's a cultural history piece looking at how we've commemorated the dead in print media over the centuries. The way obituaries are written has changed significantly over time, reflecting changing social norms and attitudes toward death. Segment 9, Business and Economy. Let's wrap up with business and economy news, because there are some significant developments affecting both markets and everyday costs. Bloomberg is reporting that Americans are about to pay even more at the grocery store. The headline is, "Americans are about to pay even more at the grocery store," and they're pointing to new inflation threats from El Niño and the Iran situation. Weather patterns are disrupting crop yields, which drives up food prices. And the conflict with Iran is affecting energy prices, which cascades into food costs because agriculture and food distribution are energy intensive. So even if inflation has cooled overall, food price inflation may be accelerating again. On the energy front, Bloomberg reports that oil is sliding as Iran says talks with the U.S. to end the war are continuing. The headline is "Oil Slides as Iran Says Talks with U.S. to End War Are Continuing." Energy markets are incredibly sensitive to Middle East geopolitics, and any hint of de-escalation causes prices to drop. This is good news for consumers in terms of gas prices, but the volatility makes planning difficult for businesses. The BBC has a related story: energy bills to rise for millions as impact of Iran war hits. So while oil prices might be dropping in the short term on hopes of a deal, the overall impact of the conflict is still pushing energy costs up for consumers. Natural gas prices, electricity prices, these are all getting squeezed by the disruption to global energy markets. In tech industry news, Bloomberg covers how stocks are extending highs on AI optimism even as oil slides. The markets are digesting a lot of conflicting signals right now: economic concerns from energy prices and inflation, but also excitement about AI as a growth driver. Tech stocks have been strong, driven largely by anything AI related. Reuters has a piece on Spain blocking prediction markets Polymarket and Kalshi over lack of gambling licenses. This is getting 930 points and over 400 comments on Hacker News, so it's clearly struck a nerve. Spain's regulatory authority determined that these prediction markets constitute gambling and require appropriate licenses, which the platforms don't have in Spain. This raises bigger questions about how prediction markets fit into existing regulatory frameworks. Are they gambling? Are they securities? Are they something else entirely? Different jurisdictions are answering differently, which creates a fragmented landscape for these platforms. In other regulatory news, Politico is covering the fact that the Texas GOP finally turned on Senator Cornyn. The headline is "The Texas GOP Finally Turned on Cornyn," and related coverage says Cornyn went to great lengths to avoid Trump's wrath. The Texas senator lost his seat anyway. Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General who's faced legal troubles of his own, beat Cornyn in the Republican primary runoff. It's a significant upset and a sign of Trump's continued influence over the Republican Party. Cornyn was a longtime incumbent and Senate fixture, but he wasn't Trumpy enough for the current GOP base in Texas. The general election matchup is now set: Paxton versus Democrat James Tallarico. Politico quotes Democrats as pretty damn bullish about their chances. Texas has been trending purple for a while, and Paxton is a controversial figure even within Texas, so Democrats think they've got a shot at flipping a Senate seat in a state that's been solidly red for decades. There were other Texas runoff results too. Former Representative Colin Allred knocked off Representative Julie Johnson in a Texas House runoff, and Chip Roy lost his runoff for Texas Attorney General to a MAGA challenger. Texas Republicans are clearly in a phase of purging anyone perceived as insufficiently loyal to Trump. In business news, Politico reports that billionaire Tom Steyer's ad spending is breaking records in the California governor's race. When you've got billionaire money in politics, the spending can get astronomical. Steyer is flooding the airwaves with ads trying to buy name recognition. The Associated Press has a concerning investigative piece. ICE detainees are dying by suicide at an alarming rate, an AP investigation finds. The conditions in immigration detention facilities have long been criticized, and this investigation finds that suicide rates among detainees are much higher than in the general population. It's a troubling indictment of the detention system and raises serious questions about mental health care and conditions in these facilities. There's also AP coverage of a chemical tank implosion in Washington state that killed 1 person and left 9 missing. This was at a pulp and paper mill. Industrial accidents like this are terrifying and often preventable with proper safety protocols and equipment maintenance. Bloomberg mentions it involved a methyl methacrylate tank, and there's significant discussion on Hacker News about the chemistry involved and what could cause such a catastrophic failure. Reuters has some international business and economic news. They report that Ghana,